The Evening of Theater. It's now a well-known play, now quite famous play, There's a Field. My name is Brinkley Messick. I'm a professor of anthropology, and I'm part of the Center for Palestine Studies. And it's our great pleasure and honor to be the sponsor of this play at Columbia University. I just want to mention a few things about the Center for Palestine Studies. It's the only such center, academic center, based at a university in the Western Hemisphere. It was founded in 2010, and we've had quite an interesting history of programming in three major fields, one of which is the arts. We have a whole series on called Palestine Cuts on film, theater, although this is the first time we've ever had a fully produced theater event. We've had stage readings before for the last couple of years. We also have programming in the area of Palestine and law, which we collaborate with our partners from Adalah, who I'll mention in just a moment. We also have a whole topical era that we refer to as the history of the present, which has major events, major speakers, philosophers, political figures, public intellectuals on such topics as boycott, divestment, and sanction, and many other things. This is the second night here at Columbia of the two-night run of There's a Field. It's part of their larger Land Day tour across some 20 universities here in this country that coincides with the 40th anniversary of Land Day, a commemoration every March 30th since 1976 of Palestinian land expropriated by Israel. There's a Field was written and produced by Jen Marlowe and is directed by Noel Gussiani. And I'd like to mention our co-sponsors, not only Adalah, the Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, but also the African American Policy Forum here at Columbia and the Center for Intersectionality at the Law School. And just one further note, that there is by coincidence, a strange coincidence, a very beautiful photography exhibit in the hallway by Tanya Habjuka, which I encourage you when you have occasion to leave. This is straight on down the hallway. I'd like to turn the proceedings over to Noel, the director.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Just to start, if everyone can please turn off your cell phones. The play will run about an hour and 10 minutes, and then afterwards there will be a 30 to 40 minute talkback led by Nadia Ben Youssef in the back here from Adalah. This play, written by Jen Marlowe, is a true story, and it is based on interviews, primary sources, and emails, and she has spent over 15 years gathering material and working through it to craft this piece. We have some incredibly special guests here tonight. We have Asil's parents who are here from Palestine, who I'd like to Due to high demand, we had over 100-person wait list last night and tonight, so we have added extra performances April 13th and 14th at Soho Playhouse. So please spread the word. If you like the production, we would love to fill up those spaces as well. And lastly, if you are sitting in the back, because this is a flat space, sometimes the sight lines in the back are a little bit difficult. It's mostly fine, but if you feel like standing up in the back so you're able to see better throughout the performance, feel free to. Thank you so much. Did I miss anything, Jen? No? Is that all? Great. Enjoy the show.
The panel will start in just a minute, but I want us to just take 20 seconds just to sit with what we just saw and sit with that together. To say that to me. One word.
Anger.
Anger.
Revenge.
Revenge.
Apartheid.
Solidarity.
Solidarity.
Sadness.
Sadness.
Grief. Disbelief.
Disbelief.
Desperation.
Desperation.
Courage.
Courage.
Commonality.
Commonality.
Cleansing.
Cleansing.
Injustice.
Injustice. Impunity. Impunity.
Sorrow.
Racism.
Racism. Thank you. I promise that this talk back is going to turn into something that you might have otherwise seen before, but before I introduce my panelists, I want to ask you to do one more thing, which is to turn to the person next to you, to introduce yourself, if you don't know who you're sitting next to, and share the moment in the play, a scene, a line that struck you the most, that you felt most viscerally. One moment, try to describe that to the person next to you. So introduce yourselves, and then one scene, just for a few minutes. It's experience, but if some volunteers would like to share. The courtroom. Can you say a little bit more about that?
The Israeli officers and their understanding of how it happened.
Absolutely. So the courtroom and particularly the Israeli officers and how they understood what had happened. Other scenes.
Well, more in the courtroom, just their general manner, and how they just like a hunter taking out a dog, like nothing.
Wow.
You know.
The attitude, right? The
Yeah.
court. I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
Or courtroom. The courtroom. Yes.
How familiar that story is
Say more.
around Grandmother Earth. But here, where a cop is just let go for killing a young black man in the staircase, it's the same thing. There's justification and there's no repercussions to these police officers. It's the same thing that happens there, it happens here.
Did everyone hear that? That it feels so familiar somehow, particularly the impunity, particularly that sense of injustice, and referencing this police officer who was just let go for murdering a young black man in our country. So thank you for that. Other scenes that struck you, lines that when you go home think about. Yes, sir.
You go first. I'll go first. Let me stand up.
Please.
I guess for me, it's when Asil's father talked about how he was in prison and how he was tortured. And I think that it was very poignant because it makes you realize that no matter how much you try to forgive and forget, or how you try to move on, something else continues to happen. And it's like you're never really given a true opportunity to forgive and forget because you're dealing with the same issues.
Whether it happened to you or your father or your family.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's it. Thank you. Another scene.
The description of that she was in her land and the Jews moved into
Yeah.
her land and now accuse her of oppression reminded me of the Mexicans in Texas.
Wow.
Who were there, and then the U.S. took over, and they were suddenly in the U.S. and the same thing of talking about crossing borders, where we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Powerful scene. This is the scene in the hospital, right, where Yael is trying to explain or question why she wouldn't celebrate Independence Day. It's a very. I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that into the room. We will continue some of this discussion, but I first want to introduce my esteemed panelists here. It is an honor to be sitting with you both and to have learned so much from both of you. And I want to get your reflections and have the audience have an opportunity to speak with you a bit about your experience, both in writing the play and watching the play and being organizers for justice. So I am joined here to my right, by Tenjiwa McHarris, who is an incredible organizer, particularly against police violence and the occupation of Black and oppressed communities in this country and around the world. And she currently and most recently co-founded Blackbird, which is focused on movement building. So she will be able to speak a little bit more about, someone brought up the word familiar. How does this relate? Why are we telling this story here and now? And what can we do together? And to her right, Jen Marlowe, who is the playwright herself, an organizer, a committed activist, an author, filmmaker, everything, woman. And it's an honor to be with you both. So in fact, I want to start with you, Tenjiwa, if we can. And get a bit of your reflection about the moment that we're in, why this story is important now, and maybe reflections, if you want to share scenes that you thought were particularly poignant and important for us to take away from this evening.
Sure, thank you. I first want to say how honored I am to be here, and how deeply inspired I am by you both and your family, and the courage that you've shown everyone. Very touched by how much power you have, and just heartbroken, and I'm sorry for your loss. So a couple things, the scene that hit me, it's the second time I've seen this play, is the scene that speaks to the blood on the ground, and the sister holding and keeping the stones with the blood, her brother's blood. And it sticks with me because I think about how much blood are on the streets, on the ground across this country, all over the world. And I think about Kimani Gray, who was killed when he was 16 years old, and I think about the blood on the street in Brooklyn, and the flowers that they put, his friends put, his family put next to his blood. And, this story is a heartbreaking one, and it's a powerful one. And the reason why it's so important is because it teaches us courage. It teaches us the power of resisting. It teaches us that hope, that believing that the world can change, that things can change, is not just possible, it's something that we must believe will happen. And it's important that the story is told here because it fills me with so much courage. You both fill me with so much, you inspire me with your courage. And I think movements around the world, and the movement, particularly the movement that talks about the killing of Black people in this country, the killing of oppressed people, poor people in this country, can be deeply, and we are inspired by the Palestinian people and the way you resist and the way you have fought for justice. And that's why it's important. The way in which you love so deeply to keep going has the ability not just to inspire people where you are, but all over the world, and in particular in this country. And the connections are just so powerful. The ways in which the dehumanization, the criminalization of a people, that means that life is so devalued, it can be killed. And it can be killed and be called justice. And that similarity is so important to understand, because the ways in which our oppressions all over the world are linked is so strong. It is a profound mistake for our response to our oppression not to be linked, for our movements not to be connected, especially here in the United States. When we talk about a country that kills Black people, that devalues poor people, that devalues people, the other, and then does that, or helps and supports other countries to do that, like it does with Israel. And so it's important that any movement in this world, but particularly any movement in this country, understands the ways in which the United States government devalues life, not just within the United States, but around the world. And so it's important that any movement has that kind of connection, has that kind of linkage. And it is my deep belief that we will only win together. The ways in which our countries are sharing technology, techniques, and personnel is profound, and it's escalating. The ways in which officers are trained, New York City officers are trained in Israel. The ways in which officers are sharing techniques are showing us that the ways in which we are oppressed are growing more and more in similarity. And so our resistance to that oppression must also grow in similarity. So again, I just want to say I'm deeply touched by your courage, and also just want to show so much love for that very powerful and profound performance. And for Jen and everyone that helped put this together.
Thank you so much. And Jen, maybe you can just jump off of that a little bit to tell the audience a bit about where this play came from and why this moment, why you felt like it was time to tell it now, 15, almost 16 years later.
I'm not sure how much I want to add after Tanjuan. I will always remember the moment that I learned that Asil was killed. The Second Intifada had just started. I was working in Jerusalem and living in Jerusalem at the time, and Asil had been my camper in Seeds of Peace. Many political lifetimes ago, I worked for Seeds of Peace. But I was in the United States for a couple of weeks, and I had gone on a camping weekend in the North Cascades with some friends, and the Second Intifada broke out while I was camping. And I came home, and there was a pile of, it was Sunday night, and like the last 4 days, New York Times on my porch, and I stayed up till 5 in the morning reading through these New York Times, trying to figure out like what the fuck had just happened, like while I was camping in the North Cascades. Like the world I was about to go back to was up in flames, and I finally fell asleep. I remember really clearly, woke up, made a cup of coffee, and right before I took a sip, I got a phone call, and it was my boss, Adam, calling me from the Seeds of Peace Center to tell me that Asil had been shot and killed. And we didn't know any of the details yet about exactly what happened. We learned that later from Abu Asil when we went and visited Arade. Adam hung up the phone, and I hung up the phone, and all I knew was that Asil had been at a demonstration and that he was shot and killed. And what I remember so clearly at that moment is that all I could think about was the cup of coffee I had just made. And I remember looking at it and wondering, asking myself, what do I do? Do I still drink the coffee? What am I supposed to do? What do you do when you find out that a kid that you love has just been killed? And I realized later that I was in shock, and all my mind could grasp at that moment was the coffee. And the shock wore off, but the question, what do I do, just grew stronger. And it grew stronger as I got closer to Asil's family and saw them deal with the traumatic loss following their son's murder. And it grew even stronger when I saw that there would be no justice in the traditional mechanisms of justice, that the state that was being tasked to give justice was of course the same state that had murdered their son, and that there would never be justice in that mechanism. And so the play grew out of the response, the question of what can I do? And I very much believe that art can perform alternative forms of justice, because I think that the two main needs that justice fulfills is accountability and truth-telling. And there was nothing that I could do that would bring about the accountability piece, but the truth-telling was something we could do, and that could provide some form of alternative form of justice. And so that's how the play started, and I began interviewing Asil's family, was particularly Nardine, who's one of my closest friends in the world, and grew into one of my closest friends just a few months after Asil was murdered. And year after year, we continued to do more and more interviews, and after a while I realized the play was not about Asil, as I thought it would be, that Asil's murder, of course, was the central event of the play, but that actually the play was about Nardine. and that I was no longer just interviewing her to get all the background stories and the childhood memories of a SEAL, but that it was really about her journey, and that rather than taking 1 or 2 years to write the play that I had expected, and it grew into 5, 6, 7, 8, 15 years, that ended up actually really being important, even though it was unintentional. I didn't mean to take 15 years, but that allowed for a journey. This could be a time for us to really go back to the script, redevelop it. I hadn't touched it in a couple of years at that point. And Noelle and I started working on it, and I was going back to all of the material that I hadn't looked at in several years. And this was in the summer of 2014 that we started doing this. So right at the moment that I'm going back to all of the details of a SEAL's murder and the impunity that followed that, it was July 2014. Mike Brown was murdered right at the time that I started doing that, followed by Eric Garner being murdered in Staten Island, followed in November by Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old child being murdered by the police in Cleveland, followed by the movement that really was reinvigorated in response in Ferguson, in Baltimore. All of that was happening right at the moment that I was diving back into a SEAL story. And the connections just felt so immediate to me, and so clear, and so profound, and it felt to me like there was a reason why it took 15 years, and that reason wasn't just because that was the time it took for Nardine's journey to be told, but that this was the time for this story to be told in this country. And I want to say to, well, there's so many things I would like to say to Abu Wasil and to Wasil, and we'll be able to hear directly from them later. But I want to say that for me, the most important part of telling this story is wanting to offer something to your family, and that you know that not only that a SEAL is remembered, and that his story is remembered, but that the words he spoke when he said, "I will go on," that I will make this planet a better place to live, and I will go on, that some of that is happening, and that a SEAL does go on and continues to inspire people and to make this world a better world because of him and because of how you raised him. So I want to thank you for the gift that you gave all of us as a SEAL.
I want to turn it over to you and see if you have any questions for our panelists before we hear from Abu Wasil. So about 10 minutes or so, if you have questions. I think we might have an extra mic. Yeah.
I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about some of the responses that you've been getting on your tour around the country.
Sure. Do you want to talk about it? You can look at every performance.
So this is a part of a 24 performance play. We just added 2 more performances in April in New York. And it's been at universities, mostly the Boston to DC corridor. They're heading this week to tomorrow to Atlanta, to Florida, and we're heading together to St. Louis, and the play will be, was meant to end in Ferguson. It's going to end in New York, but we'll be there with partners that have been instrumental and on the ground in St. Louis. So it's a pretty comprehensive performance, and the responses have been much like the one tonight. That there's a lot of sorrow, that there's a lot of sadness. It feels frustrating. It feels unjust. But we've also had pretty extraordinary experiences. Part of the universities that we're visiting are historically black colleges and universities, the HBCUs. So we were right outside of Baltimore at Bowie State University, if you're familiar with that university, Maryland's oldest historically black college. And it was a smaller audience. It was a smaller audience of about maybe 35 people or so. And one of our colleagues who is a partner in the play asked the question, how many of you are deeply involved in the issue of Palestine? Why are you here?
Or even
Know about what's going on. And 3 people raised their hands. 2 of them were white. But then we did this talk back. We said, so what's, one word? Tell us one word. And the first word from the front row was relatable. The second word was familiar. The third, society. Fourth, reality. Fifth, Ferguson. Sixth, Baltimore. And it was like, that's it. That's it. This is what the story is about. It's about a system of oppression that is so familiar. It's a system of injustice and structural violence that oppressed communities know very well. So they saw this story taking place thousands of miles away and said, I know this story. You don't have to tell me anything else about this story. So that tells me that we have important work to do, too. It tells me that we have to, in some way, change what our objective is. It's about uniting against shared oppression, but it's more than that. It's what Tenji was saying, that it's not that the oppression is tied, but that our liberations are tied. And that we have to create spaces where we're co-educating and sharing strategies of resistance and recognizing that it's a system, it's a structure. And that has been, I think, the most important part of this production. Yes, sir.
In regards to what you just said about moving forward together in the struggle, and the struggle seems to be from year to year, and as Angela Davis has said not too long ago, if you were interested in international politics in the late 80s, you were against apartheid in South Africa, and if you're interested in international relations now, you're for the liberation of Palestine. So in those regards, one of the things that the play pointed out, besides all the horrific stuff that happens over there, is the contradiction in Seeds of Peace in terms of normalization and how's that going to work when you're buddy-buddy with somebody and then they're going to come back and shoot you and stuff like that. And so in that aspect, which I thought dealt very nicely in the play, it also raises the contradiction in this country in terms of the forces that are trying to fight against the oppression here. There's some of that element going on there too, and how that relates and how that's really critical and important for people to deal with, to be united and to take leadership from people you should be taking leadership from.
Is that a comment or a question? Or
This is more of a question for you, is how did you decide to sort of put that little contradiction in there, which I thought was quite well, though you didn't mention the word normalization and things like that, but it's sort of, was that an important part for you to do that?
Yeah, it was a very important part for me. I mean, that tension came out of, is this still on?
Yes.
The tension came out of my conversations with Nardine and the struggles that she had with Seeds of Peace for all the reasons or some of the reasons that's revealed in the play. There could have been a lot more. But for me, it was also, it felt very important to me to include that because I share those critiques. I worked for 4 years for Seeds of Peace. I saw really many beautiful things happen. I have deep appreciation for the Israeli Seeds, like some of the characters that you saw reflect the Israeli Seeds who really challenged themselves and went on a journey of transformation that led to them being anti-occupation activists and anti-colonial imperialist activists. And I saw that change happen in, like Nardine said, a handful of young people, and I have so much admiration and respect for that. But I think the main criticism I have for organizations that are founded on the premise of humanizing, of course it's a wonderful thing for people to see each other as human beings and to humanize each other, but when programs are predicated on humanization as if the core root of the problem is hatred, and that if only people could get past the hatred and see each other as human beings, everything would be fine, that's deeply problematic to me because I don't think the core of the problem is hatred. Hatred is an outgrowth of the problem, but the core of the problem is oppression and is imbalanced structures of power and privilege. So joint work between Palestinians and Israelis that are about confronting unequal structures of power and privilege, and that are about dismantling those structures and building in their place.
We might end with that question. Another question? Yes?
I don't know. The concept of occupation, which, as long as I've been in this country now, people do not realize, do not acknowledge that we are standing on occupied land. From the Inuit Nation down to Patagonia, this is occupied land. Now, have all of you, first of all, thank you for all your words tonight. But has there been any connection with the native? Because I saw the video between the Black Lives Matter and the Palestinians that they made together, and I was like, yes! And then I was like, wait a minute, where's the native voices? Because 1,200 native women have been lost in Canada, never been investigated. 6 kids just committed suicide in the Cree Nation. One 12-year-old little girl went downstairs in her basement and committed suicide on Pine Ridge Reservation. And I'm just, I guess, frustrated because it's like, we need to hook up with them. Okay, I come from a place where one of my best friends was pulled out of a car at a checkpoint and shot point blank. Because the only reason he was done that is he was young, Palestinian, male. I'm from Lebanon.
Thank you very much for raising that and for bringing that here. There's actually, in most of the performances, and we neglected to do that tonight, and that was not something we should have neglected, but actually in the post-play introductions, we have acknowledged whose land we are on, and we have made a point of making that connection, and I apologize that we didn't do that tonight, and we should have, and we will continue to do that with other performances. In all of the universities where we're performing, student groups have been forming. There's been coalition of different student groups, and in several universities, that coalition has involved groups that are working on Indigenous people's rights in this country as well. So it is a connection that we agree 100% that is very important and needs to be uplifted more. That connection and those struggles need to absolutely be highlighted more.
So I'm just going to turn it over to the two of you quickly to answer the question, what can we do? What should we do? Angie, you want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm gonna answer this question the way I typically answer this question when it's come to me. But before I do that, to your point, there's a line in the play that I thought of when you spoke, which is to build a country on the ruins of another. And so it's essential that movements for justice have the kind of analysis that understands the land that we stand on and the world that we're in order to respond and fight oppression. And so I just wanted to respond to that. But to your question, what do we do? I tend to think about it in 3 different layers, depending on where you are in your life. And I can't speak in terms of the Palestinian people and the movement to free Palestine, but I can only speak around justice, which is the decisions that we make every day to disrupt the status quo. Is what decision will I make to disrupt the status quo? Which side will I stand on? Which side of history will I choose? There's the right side and the wrong side. There's no third option. And every single day we make a choice, actively. Today I made a choice, yesterday I made a choice, and I work very hard so that tomorrow I can make a choice in my life to disrupt what is normal, which is the dehumanization of people, whether it's the indigenous people, whether it's black people, whether it's the Latino people, whether they're documented or undocumented, the Palestinian people. Every single day I make a choice to say this is not right. I choose to stand on the right side of history. Every day we make that choice. And we choose in the ways that we speak, we choose in the actions that we choose to take, and we choose by our behavior. We choose what we decide to say, how we decide to fight, every single day. So whether you decide to go to a protest, or you decide in a room with someone you love, or someone that you don't even know, that what they said is wrong, even though that's scary sometimes, even though it sometimes also frightens you, that you may not have the right words. But to say no, this is not okay, is the first thing that we can do. And that's oftentimes the hardest thing to do. It's not always joining an organization that's the hardest, or going to a protest. It's saying, what will I make of my life? And then the second is, what kind of impact, the second layer is like, what kind of impact do I make on the people around me? And the third is something broader. How do I engage in a kind of struggle that imagines the world being differently? That has the courage to hope in the kind of way that says things don't have to be the way they are. We oftentimes, I think, fear hoping because we sometimes don't think it will ever change. And so having the courage to imagine the world being fundamentally different, where capital doesn't mean more than people, where profit doesn't mean more than people, where state violence is such an injustice that people will be brought to justice. A world that means that people's fundamental rights are respected, that people can have access to healthcare, they can have access to quality housing, that we can have a world that actually exists, that you cannot take and steal someone's land and not be held accountable for it. That kind of world can exist, and that we can engage and struggle with each other to think about how do we get there. And that means being in community with people, some people that you know, some people that you don't know, some people that look like you, some people that don't look like you, but that are in the space, in the room together, committed to justice and have made a decision that they won't give up.
But I would actually love to invite Abu Wasil to address us for a few moments, and it might be that he has something he wants to say about what you want us to take from this room and do with it, or you might have something else that you want to say. But I'd love to invite Abu Wasil, Wasil's father, to address us for a few moments. My colleague Amr Sharab will be translating for Abu Wasil.
مساء الخير للجميع.
Good evening, everyone.
شرف كبير لي أن أكون بينكم.
It's a big honor for me to be here amongst you tonight.
خاصة أني أتيت أحمل عطر روحي أسيل إليكم.
Especially that I came here carrying the spirit and soul of Aseel to you.
العاصفة التي عصفت بوطني منذ 48 ما زالت تشتد، والأيدي التي حصدت آلاف الأرواح من شعبي ما زالت تحصد هذه الأرواح.
The storm or the hurricane that has taken my country since 1948 is growing stronger, and the machine that has been taking thousands of lives is growing even stronger and stronger.
آلاف الأزهار التي تشبه أسيل في كل شيء تقتل اليوم، هذا اليوم في فلسطين إعداما وبدم بارد.
Thousands of flowers, thousands of souls, in every way, just like a seal, are being killed, are being executed with cold blood today in Palestine.
صحيح أن فقدان أسيل فاجعة كبيرة بالنسبة لنا.
Yes, it's true that losing a seal was a great travesty for us.
لكن الرسالة التي تركها لنا أسيل ثقيلة جدا.
But the message that Asil left behind to us is a hefty one.
وهي إرساء العدالة والمساواة عبر العالم.
That message is to work for justice and equality throughout the world.
وقد قال لي يوما أن الإنسان قد يطيب له أن يضحي بنفسه من أجل مبادئ سامية يحملها.
He once told me that a person would gladly sacrifice their life for the high principles they believe in.
وقد حملنا الرسالة ولم نكن الوحيدين الذين حملنا هذه الرسالة.
We've carried this message around, and we're not the only people who have been carrying it around.
صارعنا النظام الصهيوني العنصري بما أتيح لنا من أدوات للوقوف في وجهه.
We have fought against the racist Zionist regime with all the tools we have.
Legal.
That would be, what's the word? Legal tools.
أولا ما أريد أن أشير إليه أن لجنة أور لم تقم برغبة الحكومة الصهيونية.
I want to point out that the OR Commission was not started by the will of, or willingly by the Israeli government.
الفرصة التي أتاحها باراك حينها حيث أعلن انتخابات لرئاسة الحكومة وهو يعرف أن الأصوات العربية هي التي تعيده إلى رئاسة الحكومة، أعطتنا الفرصة لأن نضغط من أجل أن نحصل على لجنة تحقيق رسمية.
There was a political opportunity when Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Barak, called for an early election. He knew that he wouldn't get elected without the Palestinian Arab votes. And we bounced on that opportunity and exerted pressure to get that commission.
النقطة الثانية، نحن من التجربة لم نكن نعول على لجنة التحقيق الرسمية بأن تعطي العدالة أن تظهر وأن يعاقب الجناه.
I want to also point out that we did not, through our experience, many years of experience, we did not expect that the government commission would would bring about justice or find the guilty parties.
مع ذلك أردنا أن تبقى أسماء الشهداء والإجرام الذي قاموا به في أكتوبر في الداخل الفلسطيني ماثلا أمام العالم أجمع، وأن تكون لجنة التحقيق منصة لإيصال صوتنا إلى العالم.
Nonetheless, we wanted to keep the names of the martyrs who were murdered inside of Palestine in the forefront for everyone to see, and for the horrendous crimes that were committed against them, for the forefront for everyone to see.
لم تكن الطريق مفروشة بالورود.
It was not an easy path. Definitely was not covered with flowers.
كان هناك عوائق كثيرة، ولكن أذكر أهم هذه العوائق أن أبناء شعبي في الداخل الفلسطيني لم يرتقوا إلى المستوى الفهم الصحيح لمعنى الاستشهاد والتضحية.
There has been many obstacles along the way. Chief amongst them is my fellow Palestinian Israeli citizens did not really get to the level of understanding the meaning of sacrifice and martyrdom.
ولم يفهموا معنى تخليد الشهيد وأحلام الشهيد ووصية الشهيد.
They did not grasp or understand the meaning of immortalizing the martyr and the name of the martyr and the dreams of the martyr.
وهذا الأمر أعطى لجنة التحقيق الرسمية الفرصة لتقرر ما قررت.
That attitude gave the Official Investigation Commission an opportunity to make the decisions and determinations that has made.
لأن أعضاء اللجنة شعروا أن لا أحد يدعم أهالي الشهداء.
Because members of that commission felt that there was no pressure. No one really supported the families of the martyrs.
من الناحية الأخرى وليعذرني أصدقاء أسيل في السيتس اوف بيس أو في أي مكان آخر، كنا بحاجة إلى أي فعل بسيط لدعمنا في ذلك الوقت. كنا بحاجة لمظاهرة واحدة أو تظاهرة أمام أي سفارة صهيونية في أي مكان في العالم.
And also to add to that, and I want Seeds friends to pardon me, but we needed every little support we could get at that time. We could have used any demonstrations, any demonstration in front of any Zionist embassy anywhere in the world.
لكن ما زال المستقبل أمامنا، وأنا على استعداد لبذل كل ما أستطيع من طاقة ومن إمكانيات من أجل الوصول إلى الحقيقة وإلى العدالة بمساعدة كل من يستطيع أن يساعد ويساهم في هذا الطريق.
Nonetheless, the future is still ahead of us. And I'm willing and I will do everything in my power, in everything I'm capable of, and to work with everyone who is willing to help, to bring about the truth and to bring about justice.
بعد أشهر قليلة ستكون الذكرى 16 لفقدان أسيل ورفاقه. آمل أن تخرج تظاهرات أمام السفارات الصهيونية في العالم.
In a few months, the 16th anniversary of Asil and his friends will be upon us. And I hope there will be some demonstrations coming out in front of the Zionist embassies around the world.
بالنهاية معركتنا ليست معركتنا الخاصة، هي معركة كافة المضطهدين والمظلومين في العالم، إن كان السود في الولايات المتحدة أو المضطهدين في جنوب أفريقيا وما زالوا مضطهدين، أو في أي مكان آخر من العالم.
To conclude, I want to say that our fight, our struggle is not only the fight and struggle of the Palestinian people. It's the struggle of all the oppressed around the world, whether they're blacks in America, blacks in South Africa, who are still oppressed, by the way, and anywhere in the world.
لكم الشكر وإلى اللقاء.
Thank you. And